Luck is where preparation meets opportunity. Putting yourself in an environment where you get exposed to a lot of opportunities, it gives you more surface area for running into good ones. And so being prepared to take advantage of opportunities oftentimes looks like luck. A good way of forming a business or a solution is finding things that most people find really hard and things that are relatively easy for you to do.
All right, we're live. Welcome to another episode of Life Sciences 360. My guest today is somebody who's doing a lot of amazing things in Houston, a lot of amazing things in cell therapy, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy this conversation. Let's dive in and talk to Dr. Jason Bock, founder and CEO of CTMC, which stands for Cell Therapy Manufacturing Center. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Thanks so much for having me, Harsh.
So CTMC is a very unique company from what I researched. Do you want to tell the listeners how the idea to form this company came about?
Sure. So previous to moving to Houston, I had a more than 20-year career in small, medium, and large-size biotech and biopharma, developing complex biologics treatments, figuring out how to manufacture those, delivering them to patients, and ultimately scaling those and commercializing those. And then about 7 years ago, when the first cell therapies for oncology were gaining quite a bit of notoriety and were being commercially approved, it was really interesting to me that this whole new class of treatments that were living drugs that offered the potential of curative treatments with a single dose were becoming a reality. And yet it was clear that the manufacturing and the CMC development for these was going to be really challenging. And I sort of pride myself on doing really hard things. So I'm like, that looks really hard. Let's try and do that. And in parallel and somewhat unconnected, some of the leadership through friends of friends at MD Anderson had gotten in touch with me, and we started talking about what we could do together in a very differentiated way. And it struck me that if you think about the most basic level for autologous cell therapies, where you start with the patient's own cells, then manufacture, engineer them, and then reintroduce those into the same patient, it's a very novel supply chain for a biopharmaceutical, where you begin with the actual patient and then end with the patient as is standard. And so it just sort of made intuitive sense to me that, hey, with MD Anderson being the number one cancer center in the world and having more patients on clinical trials than any other place, doing something to co-localize manufacturing of these complex cell therapies with where all the patients were could be very differentiating. And so that's why I packed up my family. We moved down to Houston, founded this new group within MD Anderson to help faculty members industrialize their cell therapies, bring them into the clinic for proof of concept studies, doing that in a robust way. So those ones that work, we're ready to move on to late phase and studies and hopefully commercialization. As we began developing that model for initially MD Anderson invented products, actually biotech companies started coming to us and saying, hey, can you help us do that same thing? You have all the internal resources to do it. Why don't we partner and co-develop products together? And so we signed a number of co-development partnerships with biotech as well. And then just about 2 years ago, things were going so well that we decided to spin the group out of MD Anderson and formed a joint venture with another amazing company, National Resilience, who's focused on innovative approaches to complex biologics manufacturing. And so we've been operating this way for almost 2 years. Over that time, we've filed 6 INDs on novel products, novel cell therapies, initiated clinical studies, and really trying to find an efficient way of moving products from research stage into the clinic and understanding how well they work.
That's a fascinating story, because it sounds like you were, like you said, you were already doing the work at MD Anderson, and a lot of the biotech companies came to you because the organization had a reputation in the cancer research space. So it sounds like a little bit of luck, but you were also in the right place at the right time with the right team. So walk me through, like, uh, when you were defining the vision or strategy of CTMC as it was being formed, whether it was with your group of people, or whether some of the conversations that you had with Resilience to say, hey, this is how we should, go. And can you give us some backdoor or behind the scenes stories of how that
Sure.
came?
You know, basically, the simple way of saying is, I think a good way of forming a business or a solution is finding things that most people find really hard and things that are relatively easy for you to do. And
Hmm.
so I said, like, look, running early stage cell therapy clinical trials is really challenging for biotech companies. They have to coordinate between manufacturing site, multiple clinical sites. This is all on demand manufacturing. So as you enroll a patient in a clinical study, you have to line up a manufacturing slot, produce that batch, and get it back to that patient very quickly. Sadly, there's a clock on these clinical studies. The patients are very sick, and so literally can't wait very long. So being very efficient about it is important. Um, and so what I saw is other people doing everything in like this, the old way of doing, like, hey, this is how we did monoclonal antibodies, so let's do cell therapies this way.
Yep.
But we had a chance to rethink that, and the MD Anderson guys were very open to doing innovative and different approaches, and so they bought into it in a significant way. And so we actually acquired a local biotech company's cell therapy development and manufacturing facilities, Bellicum Pharmaceuticals, and MD Anderson
Hmm.
bought that facility from them. So again, a very unusual thing for an academic medical center to be buying a facility from a biotech company. Um,
Yep.
and I really give a lot of credit to the MD Anderson guys. And I think in general, I would say the Houston and even the Texas mindset of wanting to do impactful things, wanting to do big, bold ideas that can move the needle, not just
Yeah.
not just let's do something like everyone else does. So that was the idea
Yeah.
of like, hey, we have a chance to do something in a very differentiated way that could help accelerate the transformation that I think cell therapy will bring.
Hmm.
And humbly, I think we're well along that way with a number of uh, new cell therapies that we've brought into the clinic and some of the clinical results we've already seen from that.
Yeah, I mean, when I was doing research for this, I also saw you talked about impactful, and that reminds me, you were selected or nominated on the Medical Makers list of 2024. So, what does that kind of recognition mean to you and for the team that you work with?
Thanks for recognizing that. I was very honored to receive this, the Medicine Makers Power List for advanced
Yep.
therapies. Um, I think it's just a recognition of, you know, um, thinking of innovate. Well, let me say it this way. I think we have this amazing opportunity, like cell therapies, having a single dose that can cure, horrendous diseases like cancer is an amazing opportunity that many of us in biotech and biologics research have worked our whole careers towards. And it's somewhat within reach. Um, and it's going to happen. I think it's inevitable. It's going to happen.
Yep.
But if we are really thoughtful and intentional about the approaches we take, I think we can accelerate that transformation. And that was the concept that MD Anderson, really bought into, and that was what the team at um, medicine makers saw as like, hey, we're doing something differently, and that overall is helping individual companies, individual products, but also demonstrating a different path that I hope will accelerate uh, the whole field of cell therapy and what it can do for starting with cancer patients. Now we're actively involving autoimmune diseases, and I think it'll transform the whole way healthcare is administered.
Yeah, and this is, like I said, this is such a unique company, and as you were saying, a academic institution buying a facility for manufacturing, no, that's not common to do. So looking at what you did with the resilience team in forming CTMC, do you think there are other uh, academic institutions trying to follow your blueprint and maybe do this not in cell therapy but maybe in other areas? Or do you think that, have you heard of any such projects that are ongoing, or what do you think this is going to do for the future? I think it's better for the industry and research and patients overall, but I think you took the leap, and now I think there's a lot of people that are going to follow your blueprint there.
Yeah, um, I think you're right. Um, Somewhat of a blueprint, although I think what's important, and part of the reason I moved to Houston, specifically to work at MD Anderson, is because I think it's a fairly unique organization at the scale that it operates
Mm,
at, the depth of scientific uh, focus that it has on oncology, and so I think some of the things that we're able to do here are going to be difficult to replicate because and that's epitomized in the joint venture. What we wanted was a depth of scientific and oncology cancer understanding that comes and volume of patients that comes from working with MD Anderson, and yet a focus on industrial manufacturing, not academic manufacturing, not just get things done, but really like how can we differentially um, focus on rigorous manufacturing, and then combining those two. So I think that's a tricky
mm,
combination, a tricky nut to crack. I think there are some amazing academic institutions that have great science, maybe not the scale that MD Anderson has, and there's some great facilities with industrial manufacturing. But finding a way to marry those two together is a big challenge, and I think that's what differentiates us. So I think it's going to be a bit challenging to copy in other ecosystems exactly like we have.
right, right. Yeah, it's yeah, we'll have to see, what other kind of projects or initiatives come out of this. But talk to me about, having the facility, the CTMC, the facility in Houston. You have the team there, you have the MD Anderson Center right there, you have the close access or proximity to the patients. Everything is like right in that town. Like, I know you thought about this and you wanted this vision to turn into a reality, but how lucky or valuable do you think it is for your team to have that access to patients and all the talent right in Houston?
Uh, the short answer would be very lucky and very valuable. Uh,
Yep.
I, Harsh, I have this phrase that I really latched onto for a long time, that luck is where uh, preparation meets opportunity.
Mm,
Actually, you can
yep.
control both of those to some extent. So preparation means, do you have a good idea? Are you ready to take advantage of opportunities when they present themselves? And then opportunities, I think, are somewhat spontaneous, but putting yourself in an environment where you get exposed to a lot of opportunities, um, it gives you more surface area for running into good ones. And so being prepared to take advantage of opportunities oftentimes looks like luck. Um,
Hmm.
and I have to say, we were, yeah, very lucky that the facility I'm sitting in today became available at a time when we were interested in it. Um,
Yep.
that was partially because I had, well, already moved down to Houston, had been talking to the leadership about the need for an industrial facility, And so when I brought to them this opportunity to acquire a facility, they were like, this is what you've been talking about for the last 6 months?" I'm like, "Yeah." And
Yep.
even when I like was being recruited to discuss with them the opportunity, I'm like, I remember specifically, and it really was impactful to me in my decision when I talked with the president of MD Anderson, Peter Pisters. And he's a busy guy. I had about 15 minutes with him, and he's like, what question can I answer for you? I was like, my number one question is, do you want to do big things, or is this going to be like, hey, a nice academic initiative that we say we're doing something, but is just playing around? Because if you want to do big things,
Mm,
I'm all in. If you just want to, you know, say you're doing something, and um, I have to say the leadership at MD Anderson lives that motto of the motto they have that's on the walls is do no small things. Really is. They're the number one cancer
interesting.
center, and they take that position very seriously and try and do things that they can do that other people can't. And so he's like, we want to do big things. And so I jumped in with both feet. And then when I brought the opportunity to acquire this biotech company's facility, he's like, so this is what you were talking about? I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
So we had sort of done the preparation uh, to take advantage of the opportunity.
Yeah, I can sense the excitement, and I can almost visualize you talking to him and pitching this story, and it's just it's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, despite all the preparation and things I talked about, I'm even surprised at how much um, this concept has caught on. We've been able to grow. We're
Hmm.
over 90 people now, the six INDs, um, and just the um, interest and the hunger to hear, how we approach things and the ability we have to influence has been um, humbling in many ways and surprising as well.
Yep.
My 5 year plan um, had a much slower growth and not doing this scale of activities. Um, I think we finished my 5 year plan in about a year and a half. So,
That's yeah, that's I think you're if you did this from 2022 to 2020, what is it, 2024? I don't know what you're going to do in the next 5 years, but I'll be following you pretty closely.
some interesting things we're cooking up. So stay tuned.
Yes. Yeah. So you mentioned about some of the challenges in cell therapy. I worked at Juno Therapeutics, a cell therapy company, back in 2018, and that went up, got acquired by Celgene and
Yeah,
BMS. I think at that time, Kite and Novartis had Avexis that they acquired for the cell therapy product. So I know from my time working there, like you mentioned, having the patients, because there's no product, you're dealing with the patient's blood, or you're engineering those cells and giving it back to the patient. So the chain of identity and chain of custody is very important. But outside of that, just what are some of the other challenges in cell therapy manufacturing that you are seeing with the biotech companies that CTMC has worked with?
yeah. Uh, so many interesting challenges. These are living cells, and so they change by the hour, and so really maintaining tight control over process control over that is really important. Just like with the early stages of antibodies, I think our analytics are, to be honest, very primitive still in our ability to
Mm,
really understand the attributes of these cells and what makes them good cells and bad cells, if you will. I, maybe I'm getting too much gray hair now. I remember back when we were releasing antibodies by running an STS page gel and staining it with Kumasi and saying, oh, there's one band, so it's probably a pure protein. Over the
mm,
last 20-25 years, the analytics got so much better that we could really understand the molecular changes in antibodies. That's going to need to
yeah.
happen in cell therapy so we can really understand the differences from one batch to another. Um, and uh, the sheer volume of the number of batches that are produced. When I commercialized some of our antibodies, we maybe only had 6 batches during all of clinical development that we would file in a
Mm.
BLA, maybe 9 um, in cell therapy, because every batch is a single dose. We would have um, uh, hundreds of batches that would go into a BLA. And so just maintaining control over that amount of data is going to be critical. And that's why one of the things that we've also initiated here and part of the partnership with Resilience is moving to all digital quality systems. And so
Hmm.
by the end of next year, everything we do will be electronic and automated and integrated to manage that, just like you said, maintain the chain of identity and patient segregation, and at the same time allow efficient production and review and rapid release of a large number of batches. So I think those elements are really specific to cell therapy. Large number of batches, the proximity to patients just makes everything easier, so you don't have to worry about organizing planes and things. Houston also is a great place if you do need to organize planes. Um, so centrally oriented in the U.S. that basically everything is a
Yep.
3-hour plane ride uh,
Mm.
to any place. So also serves very well for as we start to run trials outside of MD Anderson and scale to run multi-center trials. Houston is ideally suited to support those as well.
And this is another question that I had for you, because you talked about 6 INDs that you've CTMC has done, and I don't remember how many companies you said, biotech companies you worked with since.
We've publicly announced 4.
4. Okay. So my question was, now you have CTMC, you have the biotech or therapeutic company, then you have Resilience that is giving you access to their resources. You have MD Anderson Center. So when you go for a regulatory filing, how do you navigate who's responsible for what, or where the data is coming from, which organization, and how do you even defend that to regulatory agencies, like, hey, here's the 4 players that are involved in this trial, because it's not usual.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that's a good point. Actually, and Harsh, I'm glad you bring that up because I think I didn't mention this before, but I think the regulatory aspects are incredibly important for cell therapy as well. Um,
Hmm.
the FDA is evolving, as quickly as they can, and I think doing an amazing job of pouring a lot of resources in to catch up with cell therapy. I think is oftentimes what I hear is the amount of data that was needed to support like the initial CAR T BLA approvals may not be enough even now to support cell therapy IND,
Mm.
because the bar has moved up so quickly as our understanding of
Yep.
what's important for these therapies has evolved so rapidly. And so that's a very important aspect of how we constructed CTMC, where um, the way we work with um, all of our partners is to um, have MD Anderson act as the IND sponsor because they have a very strong relationship with FDA. We
Mm.
at CTMC author and compose all of the IND sections with input from all those stakeholders, as you said, but we
Yep.
compile it in an industrial way in, of course, ECTD format within Viva regulatory system. So it looks all industrial, look just like a biotech IND, and yet it comes from MD Anderson, which has good name recognition with FDA, um,
Yep.
and um, and then we have an internal regulatory group that helps companies formulate their strategies. The benefit being that we get to, by seeing this number of INDs and the number of pre-INDs, we can really help companies um, formulate their strategy based on real information that we've seen from FDA. Of course, we're very careful to create firewalls with proprietary information between different
Yep.
partnerships. Still, there's a lot of generalities that we can draw around what are FDA's points of emphasis, what are the gray areas, what are the black and white issues. If there's a very clear cut line that FDA draws, like, we're not allowing you to do this, you have to do it this way, it's better to know that up front, and we don't even
Yep.
have to discuss that with them. But on the other hand, these gray areas are where lots of times companies often take a very conservative approach because they don't want to be put on clinical hold or things like that. But with our
Yep.
experience, we can say, that we have experience that's okay with FDA, and that often saves companies quite a bit of time and resources on the regulatory interactions. So
Right. Right.
so that's a really
Yeah,
important
and also
aspect.
from like a company, that's in the early R&D stages or preclinical stages, and if they are doing everything on their own, or maybe they're partnering with the CDMO, uh, in the companies that are working with CTMC, they now get immediate access from the day they sign the partnership agreement. Access to the talent at MD Anderson, access to resources from Resilience. Not that they're going to use everything from day one, but they have that access if they need to make a phone call or send some emails to answer. They now have literally four or three or four established organizations who understand the entire end-to-end life cycle, which probably is, for a small company with 50 people that's doing it by themselves, they don't have that advantage,
That's
right?
right.
uh
And
yeah.
small companies, some companies we work with only have 5 people. 50 people is
Mm.
great, but some of them only have 5 people and are yet able to enable a clinical study and complex manufacturing with a relatively small capital efficient footprint.
That's so mind boggling, like just a company with that, just 5 people, uh or even like, yeah, I can't imagine how it
Yeah.
is. Yeah, it's very
And
interesting.
Harsh, it comes, and going back to what you asked earlier, how did we conceptualize this up front? Remember, our original founding was to help MD Anderson faculty members come up with industrial INDs and bring those into clinic. And so, in many ways,
Mm.
that's really the purview of a biotech company. In traditional ways, you would like spin a company out to do that. But MD Anderson, with its scale, was able to create this group within MD Anderson. So, almost like MD Anderson's internal biotech to develop cell therapies. And so, then when you think about some of the projects we work with faculty members, there's usually just a professor and a postdoc who work on the project at
Mm.
research stage, and then we partner with them and we do everything else necessary to get that product through an IND and set up a clinical study at MD Anderson. So when you think about it in that context, that's why if a company's like, well, we only have 5 people, we're like, okay, we've done INDs when we only have, a professor and a.
Right, right. Yeah, collaboration is the magic word right there. Yeah. And it's happening all over the industry. This is one example. I had talked to somebody else, doing other kind of CDMO work and other projects. But overall, I'm seeing this trend where a lot of companies are going virtual manufacturing from day one. They're keeping pretty much everything they can out of the company, contracting it, collaborating instead of trying to do everything in house, because speed and quality is needed from day one, and it's always best to partner with people who've already done that, than try to do it on your own.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. The challenge is if you don't have a lot of internal resources to have tight oversight of outsourcing, that you
Mm.
can be very selective in who you partner with, and that they have a high level of
Yep.
competence, and just understanding whether picking a partner who brings a lot of that expertise to the table versus other types of arrangements can be where if you have 100 or 150 person company or even a 50-person company and you develop your own process and you can basically say, hey, CMO, run exactly this process. I don't have a facility, but
Mm.
I know the exact process. I can almost like write the batch records for you, and I need you to just execute that. That's a different model.
Yep.
It's valid, can work in the right situation, but just don't for companies not to mix up the models and
Yes. Yep.
um,
Yeah, so I haven't been to Houston, but I keep hearing from tons of people that Houston is the next big, biotech hub after Jersey, Boston, San Francisco, Chicago. Like, yeah, these have been there, but Houston is the next big thing. So, what is so fascinating about since you've been there for this long? You've been there for a few years
yeah.
now.
Well, besides the excellent restaurants and which is a good
Yep.
feature, I think what's interesting, I think cell therapy is really the linchpin for Houston's evolution in biotech. And that
Hmm.
is related to what we talked about before, that adjacency to patients makes cell therapy much easier. And
Yep.
what Houston has that's different than other cities is a high density of patients in the Texas Medical Center. So the Texas Medical Center is an area that was zoned for not-for-profit medical centers. And so it's unfortunate I have this camera on and not the one right behind me where you could see the medical center. Um,
Yep.
uh, every building on the other side of the camera is a high-rise hospital that sees a tremendous number of patients, and it's all
Mm.
in the same place in the Texas Medical Center in Houston. And so that patient density makes things a lot easier for cell therapy developers,
Yep.
and the knowledge and the concentration. So I've been really excited to see this evolution in Houston over the 5 years I've been here. It started before I got here, but I think I can see it accelerating. And I think cell therapy is going to be really the a driver for that.
Yeah, and even for newer biotech companies who want to be in that area, whether they're partnering with CTMC or Anderson, or just to be in that area to have access to investors or the community or whatever, real estate wise, I think Houston is also much favorable compared to Palo Alto or South San Francisco or Kendall Square in
Much
Cambridge.
lower income tax as well.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, it's great. What are some of I want to ask you this. You've had a very uh, influential career in this industry. You're doing a lot of amazing things. I know a lot of people in the industry look up to you and probably come to you for advice on how you've built a career. But are there any leaders that you worked in your career that gave you some valuable advice that you would like to pass on to others?
Good, good question. Um, um, yeah, I mean, so many, but at least one comes to mind. An early mentor I had um, at Human Genome Sciences, it's Indra Sanyal. And he told me something that I really liked, that was it's important to maintain focus while creating vision. And so
Mm,
being able to do both of those at the same time is really important. And I think we probably all have seen some visionaries who are great at laying out a grand vision, but then aren't able to execute. I've seen some people who are fantastic at tactics, but maybe okay, going in the wrong direction. So
Yep.
the ability to have a vision, have a North Star, if you will, and you may zig and zag along that way. Um, like I'll be the first one to say, when I moved down to Houston, um, I didn't have at all the vision of exactly what we created. It was just knew in general, um, you know, manufacturing for cell therapies was going to be key. Connection with patients was going to be important. Being associated with MD
Yep.
Anderson, oncology was going to be the way. So there were all the ingredients there. But then, as one opportunity to another laid out, oh wow, this is a way of even accelerating having an impact. And
Right.
so,
Right.
I think that's a concept that's always resonated with me. Be thinking of the big picture, but just making sure that every step you take is at least partially in that direction towards that North Star.
Yeah, I love hearing that. And I can tell you that in the 35 minutes that we've been talking, I think you've had the vision and I think you've done a really amazing job at executing what you had thought about. So yeah, wish you tons of success with CTMC and everything that you're doing.
Harsh, thank you so much for the conversation. And I know you mentioned you hadn't been to Houston. You have a standing invitation. And
Yep. I will message you the moment I'm getting on the flight.
that'd be great. Look forward to
All right.
hosting you.
Yeah, and before we sign off, where can people, listeners who are listening, or any companies or startups that are interested in working with CTMC or wanting to talk to you, pick your brain, what's the
Yeah.
best way to get to you?
The best way to find me is on LinkedIn, Jason Bock. Um, and the best way to connect into CTMC is also on LinkedIn or on our website, just www.ctmc.com.
All right, that's the pod. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it.
Harsh, thanks so much for the conversation. I really enjoyed it.